And thank you everybody for joining us on our latest Open Source VC Meetup. There's loads of familiar faces in there, which is excellent. So a good number of you I know have joined many of our open source meetups in the past, which is very cool. That's why we do them, to bring the community together. As you know, we're big on getting people together like this and trying to open up the weird black box that is VC and tech and startups. And we do all the things that you've seen on our website, like the documents and the resources, but this is a big chunk of it too, sort of opening up the network and getting really interesting people to come and talk to you about their stories. I've met a good number of you. I'm James. I'm a partner at Airtree. I'm on the board of a bunch of companies, and I work with a bunch of our founders, including a wonderful guest today. And I think it's been about a month and a bit since I last did one of these open source meetups, but interestingly, it was another proud Melbourne-based company called A Cloud Guru. We had Sam come and talk to us about their story of going from zero to a couple of $1 billion in like 5 years or 6 years, something absurd. And very excitingly, we have a guest today that is also founder of a proud Melbourne company. Very, very different space, but following in their footsteps in a similar growth trajectory, which is pretty cool. There's something in the water down in the Victoria. But before we get there, bit of housekeeping. Those of you who've joined before know that we love to see your smiling faces on Zoom. Mel and Bree have bought us the most absurdly expensive Zoom package that I think can handle like up to 1,000 people or something simultaneously on Zoom on their videos. So it blows my mind. I will try and answer questions as we go. So if you have them, stick them in the chat. I'm pretty bad at reading and talking at the same time, so I apologize if I don't get to them, but I'll try my best. And a big thank you to Spark Festival as well, who we are doing this one in collaboration with, which is a great festival. Go check out all the other programming on it. And I know a lot of you have been joining us recently recently out of lockdown, which is particularly impressive because I know that the pubs and the restaurants and the bars out there are pretty tempting, especially on a night like to this. And there's a ton of people spilling out of them all over the country. And I know that because I get to work with our next guest today, Kim, who sees all of this data on a regular basis and can see exactly how many people are out drinking and eating and doing all that fun stuff, which is fascinating. I'm sure most of you will know Mr. Yum. Anyone in Australia will certainly know Mr. Yum, and if you go out in pretty much any capital city, you would have seen and used and probably love Mr. Yum's product. Certainly was one of those things that came out the back of COVID last year, and just was one of those almost overnight changes in consumer behavior. And everybody I've ever spoken to who's used the product sort of wonders why the hell they haven't been using it their entire lives, which was pretty good customer references when we first started talking to Kim and the team. So I'm really excited that we've got Kim here today, and mostly because the company is fantastic and there's a lot of great learnings, I think, for the founder community. But in particular, the culture that Kim and her founders, Adrian and Kerry and Andre, and I saw Andre on here today, they've built the most incredibly welcoming and engaging culture in their team. And I know this because there's 105 people who just absolutely fucking love working there, and they tell me that all the time. I sort of am looking forward to one day quitting my job at Airtree and going and working for Kim. And we're going to get Kim to talk all about that. Anyway, and so we're going to dig into culture, and we're going to dig into the international expansion play, which I think is another fascinating story. But before we do, Kim, I'm going to get you to introduce yourself a little bit and talk a little bit about Mr. Yum and the sort of the founding story, how it all started to come together at the beginning.
Sure. Thanks, James. That was a really kind intro, and I will try and live up to expectations. Yeah, Mr. Yum is now coming on 3 years old. We started as actually like a really simple consumer insight, which is people are visual. We want to see what the photos of the dishes look like. and menus are text-based and they haven't changed in hundreds and hundreds of years. So the idea was, well, what could we do to make a menu a little bit more visual, more interesting, more appealing? Started doing with photos, and then we did things like language translations and ingredient descriptions. And what we didn't know about the industry at the time was just how tough the margins were, and how labor costs was going up and prices were not keeping as, consistently trending in the same direction because of competition, and they were looking for ways to become more efficient. So the industry started asking us for ways that they could pay through the menu, order through the menu, and the order and payment solutions were born. Mr. Young was actually born out of a startup kind of incubator that we had at the time, called Pitch Black, and the first 5 to maybe 7 or 8 team members came out of that. So we got a little bit lucky there that 3 out of 4 of the original co-founding team had been working together previously and had some history as well. My role, like James said, so there's 4 co-founders. I definitely can't take credit for all of the amazing work that the team do. So there's 4 of us. We have really different skill sets and very different responsibilities. So there's Adrian, and he looks after the sales and marketing and brand functions. There's Kerry, who looks after, she's our CXO. So everything post-sale, everything like customer experience and team experience related. A lot of that sits with Kez. And Andre's our CTO, and him and I are in London today, and so that's why he's joining us. The 4 of us have really different skill sets, different ideas, and different ways of thinking about global and team and culture as well. So I think that's been really helpful. And at the company, I look after the product and partnership functions of the business, as well as some stuff that I'm not as good at, like finance, and lucky we just hired a CFO. And all the things that you kind of have to do when you're a founder in the early days, and then you can hire experts to be better at those things than you are.
And it's I should point out, it's now, what is it? It's 7 a.m. in London at the moment, so it's pretty early. And so thank you for joining us on the exact opposite time zone here.
That's all right.
And actually, it's a big chunk of what I want to dive into today, is the fact that you're in London, and the fact that I sometimes lose track of exactly where around the globe you are, because you do move around a fair bit, and have thrown yourself into the international expansion in a way I really haven't seen with many founders, frankly. So I'd love to dive into that, and of course the culture bit. But before we do, talk us a little about sort of where the business is today in terms of sort of key metrics, anything you're comfortable talking about.
Yeah. James said before, we're 105. At the start of COVID, we were 12. So we were a really small business, very small team at the start of COVID, when, businesses like restaurants went into lockdown, and we really had to rethink our business, and we got a big kind of push at the same time. We're now 105. We're in about 1,500 locations. We've got offices in 5 different cities. So that's Melbourne, Sydney. We don't have an office in Brisbane, but we've got a team up there, and in the Gold Coast as well, in London and in LA. And then we've got we don't have an office in New Zealand, but we've got some operations there too. So a really, from a pretty much Melbourne-based company at the start of COVID to a really quite global operations now, in the space of about 18 months, has definitely posed some challenges, but also super exciting. We did, and then I guess on a capital raising front, which I'm sure some of you would be curious about, we did our first kind of seed round about 6 months after we started, and it was actually led by industry, so like our customers pretty much, who wanted to see something like it, but we didn't have the traction to go to a VC or anything like that. So it was 1.5 mil at 5 mil valuation 6 months after we started. And that was all done on Safe Notes, so super easy way to get started, not having to figure out like exact valuations, but having a cap in there that's pretty meaningful. And then we were like kind of in a tough spot because we raised in May 2019, about 6 months after we launched, and then we hadn't done any financing rounds, and COVID had hit in March 2020. So we were like 10 months or so into our 1.5 mil. Lucky the team was so small. We were burning like hardly any money, probably 20 or 30 grand a month at the time. And then we did another 2.5 mil round in October 2020. So it's quite a long time between May 19 and October 2020. After we'd seen product market fit, but we were still in the middle of like Melbourne lockdowns in October 2020. And that was led by a Brisbane firm called 1013, who were like a lot of pre-seed and seed stage investments. And we'd known them for a little while. So I guess they invested in us rather than invested in, you know, exactly the numbers at the time. And then we did a post-seed round that was with Airtree and James at Airtree. And that was March, April this year. So another kind of 6 months after our October 2.5. So we did 1.5 and we did 2.5, which was very much less dilution, but kind of off the back of some early COVID traction. And then April 2020, which was like after reopening, and all of our numbers looked really, really solid then. So yeah, we did kind of three rounds to get to this point, and we're now in Series A territory. So yeah, like wanted to share that with you. I think it's relevant. It's not like super clean. It's not always the cleanest run at the start, but definitely got some great investors along the way.
That was, I think that was probably it's actually probably a record for us. I think we went from first call to term sheet in about a week there, which is which just goes to whatever you did in that first meeting was pretty good. I was excited about it. And we can talk about that. I think that's the financing is a really interesting journey, and really in some ways you're at the beginning of that journey as well, because you've got firms to be a big globally dominant company in this space, which is going to take more capital. And I know you're thinking about that now. But that piece in the middle, and I know there's going to be plenty of seed stage founders out there at the moment thinking through how do you think about the seed phase? And we call it a phase at Airtree because you never know how long it's going to be. Like sometimes sometimes getting a product market fit takes like 3 months if you're lucky, and sometimes it takes 3 years, and you never really know when it's going to happen, and you sort of have to raise to take that into account, because you just don't know how long you're going to need money for. What was that like? What was that like in that the early COVID weeks and months? Because you were in a pretty tough spot with the previous business model, and many founders could have just gone, "Oh, Jesus Christ, let's try something else." But you persevered and slingshotted out the other side.
Thank you. Yeah, it was actually really like pretty emotional and pretty tough, like thinking about it now. So we were 11 people, 11 or 12 going into March 2020, when you didn't know whether it was going to last for 6 weeks, 6 months, like however long. At the time, 6 months was like the maximum amount of time anyone thought that COVID could last for. And we got a heads up about 6 or 7 days before the actual hard lockdowns came, that we were, as a country, likely to go into lockdowns, and our whole business model was based on restaurants being open, like pubs being open, bars being open. We would make no money if they weren't open. Our biggest customer at the time said to us, "Could you do like a takeout and delivery product? You've already got the menus and people can pay. So like, what can we do to collect an address and, you know, start to think about how we adapt the product?" We built, Andre and Tom, actually, we only had 2 developers at the time. Like, it was insane. Andre and Tom single-handedly, in the space of 9 days, so 7 days pre-lockdowns and then 2 days post-lockdowns, created our pickup and delivery product. And it was like self-managed delivery, so it didn't have any like driver logistic components. It was just like, here's the order, you have the address, go and take it to the house. And we got a lot of brand equity because we were like very quick to pivot, extremely there for our customers. The hundred or so locations that had Misty already could pretty much flick the switch and turn on takeout. And our team just like totally rallied around the situation. And we didn't even have that much money at the time. Like we probably had 6 or 7 months of runway on like only exact burn of like 12 people at the time.
And what are those conversations like when you sort of
we actually
that news, like we're going lockdown?
Yeah, like, oh man, like I remember listening to podcasts at the time and like trying to figure out what to do, and everyone was like, what you need to do is preserve your cash and like try and extend your runway as much as possible. And they were like, look back to the GFC, and it was all like pretty scary rhetoric in this like funding world. Like funding's gonna slow down, people are uncertain, like we don't know what's gonna happen, there's gonna be less funds deployed. And so what we did with the team, we just did the maths actually, and we like very transparently presented the scenario. We said to them, this is how much time we've got, this is how much money we've got in the bank, this is how much time we've got, this is what our burn looks like. Wrote in like a pretty long letter. If we all take a 20%, actually we did a 20% salary sacrifice. So not like a pay cut, but you get your salary sacrifice and options. This is what we extend our runway to 12 months if we all do that. Yeah. And by the way, if you go harder than 20%, like if you take more than a 20% salary sacrifice, we'll do it at an even bigger discount to what the salary sacrifice. So our valuation would have been like, I don't know, 15 mil at the time. I think we did salary sacrifice at 12.5. And then if you did more than 20%, you'd get it at 10 mil valuation. So like incentives for the team to go harder than 20%. And Andre and Tom, like they're just laughing right now, but they went really hard. Like I think Andre went down to like 50 grand salary. He did like 70% salary sacrifice, which is our CTO and co-founder today. And Tom did like, I don't know, went down to like 70 grand for a developer is insane.
Yeah.
And banked a lot of banked a lot of options, which is, you know, that they're excited about that now. Yeah. But that actually, like the 20% got us through, and we said that these were the metrics. So we said when our GMV reaches our prior to lockdown GMV, we will reverse this. So once we get back to where we were, we will like we will lift the requirement or like the ask. We didn't make it a requirement because you legally can't actually, but we will lift the request to do this. And we actually got there in like 6 or 7 weeks. So we pivoted the product and then got back to previous GMV in like 6 or 7 weeks, which was mental, on a whole different product set, a whole different takeout delivery offering. And we asked the team, and most of them kept doing it, and they kept with the salary sacrifice for a little bit longer until it really looked like we were in the clear.
I love that. So ultra transparency when the chips were down, and doing what you said you're going to do with your employees. I remember when we were doing these meetups, and a lot of people on this will remember that we were doing them weekly, and it was really such a stressful time, and a lot of them turned into sort of almost therapy sessions around the uncertainty that all founders were facing, and there were just so many stories exactly like that. And we talked a lot about some of the upsides of coming out of a crisis like this that startups have almost uniquely versus other businesses, and that you can pivot and you can adjust your product roadmap and take advantage of all the changes that big crises like this bring into account. And I can't think of any better example across our portfolio, really across anywhere, of that than you guys, and pivoting the product and coming out firing on all cylinders.
Thank you. Thanks. Didn't seem clear at the time, but we did our best. I think transparency, James, like transparency is a very big part of our culture. And if we feel like we don't know what to do, the answer is often, let's just tell the team what the data points are and see if they can help us decide. Right now, actually, we're going through a review of our compensation. We're very, very, we don't we don't have sales commissions at the moment, which is like very unique and super different to any other company. And we've not found many instances of scaling sales functions without commissions. So we're going through a process of reviewing that and trying to figure out, do we move to commissions? If yes, how do we do it? What does the targets look like? And we've been toying with this for months, and eventually we just decided we're going to put all the data together. We're going to present it to the sales teams, the account management teams, any customer facing teams, and the rest of the team, and they're just going to vote on what they want to do. We think it's going to come out the way that makes the most sense for the business, but we're going to give them all the figures and the numbers and what they would have made and what they could make, and what the risks are, etc., and just let them decide. Because I don't think like a top-down approach to changing base salaries and commission is like going to work that well for the long term. Yeah, so we're kind of going through that process at the moment.
I'd love to dive down deeper a bit into the cultural piece, because we were going to talk about international up front, weren't we? But let's push that back a bit. We can talk about that in a second. But the cultural piece, I think, is just so fascinating here, because you really have done a remarkable job of building a culture. And I think it almost surprises yourself sometimes just how it has evolved. It came through just loud and clear in all of our discussions with the team when we were first talking, and it's been the same ever since. But when you're, we talked about this just before everybody joined a little bit, this sort of idea of bringing on your first 10 people. And that's oftentimes even harder than bringing on your first seed stage investor or anyone else, like convincing people to invest their career capital when you are, 2 people with an idea or 4 people with an idea is tough. How did you do that? What were your strategies to bring the first 10 people or so?
The first 10 people have to be entrepreneurial. I think there's like a lot of people out there, fortunately, and these people are equally as important to the ecosystem as founders themselves. I truly believe that, by the way. Like we'd be in so much trouble without the first 15 people at Mr. Yum. They're entrepreneurial, but they don't want exactly the risk of having to think about cash flow, capital, product, all of the things that you need to do as founders. The main one probably being capital. Like a lot of people are entrepreneurial, but they don't want to think about having to raise money and having to fuel the tank that way. So we mostly hit up our networks, mostly with people that we'd worked with before, had known us in some capacity that we say convince, but it's almost like fool them to come on your crusade. Like at the time, it seemed like a very risky, very silly pre-product market fit idea and concept. But if you find the right people, they will value the learnings that they'll have over the next 12 months, whether it's successful or not, doesn't matter. They're going to learn a lot. And they value that over and above, going and working for a pretty safe corporate job. So yeah, I would say it's mostly networks at that point. It's mostly tapping into people that and then as well, the other piece would be like finding people in the industry. So for whatever reason, they've got a emotional connection to the problem you're solving. And if they've got an emotional connection to that problem, then you're much more likely to convince them at an early stage to come on your crusade, when most people actually can't see the point of the product or the purpose of the product, or even like how you could succeed. And Mr. Yum at the time, like it was a simple idea, and it was actually easy to understand. Like, when you go to a bar and it's like 5 deep at the bar, like that's a shitty situation. Would you rather order on your phone? Yes. Okay, cool. Like it should exist. That's a great product. But there'd been so many companies that had tried and failed. So the idea was always like a great idea, but like, why is Mr. Yum going to succeed, and why haven't the others succeeded, was like something that we got asked a lot in the early days of hiring. But yeah, I think mostly it was finding super entrepreneurial people that actually, like, the reality is, if it doesn't succeed and we all finish up in 12 months, like, do we all feel like we would have learned something that we can take forward to the next thing that we do. Like if the answer is yes, okay, cool. It's not actually that much of a risk.
So you get those first 10 or 15 sort of true believers who are buying into the learning experience, which is fantastic, and that they're probably they're harder to find up front, but when you've got them in the seats, sometimes when you're a group that small, it is more easy to sort of maintain that culture and get everybody excited about the vision. How do you scale that? You're 105 people now. What were some of the techniques you used to keep that culture strong as you got much bigger? And at what point did you notice, God, this is getting harder to keep the culture so strong?
Ironically, I don't think it's actually gotten harder, and I think that like Adrian always says this to me, actually, like this is gonna get easier in a lot of ways. Like, okay, it's gonna get easier at some point, and it's because you hire professionals to think about those things and do those things. So like one of the things that we invested in really early is a head of people, and we did that like. How big
is a team when you brought on a head of people?
35, 40, 30-ish, 40, very, very early, like in context of our journey. And Laura is incredible, and she worked at Catapult previously, and she'd seen growth from like 30 or 40 to 300, and then felt like she wanted to go back to the beginning of that journey again, so it was perfect for her. But investing in Laura like early was very important for us, and you just hire someone that like she's a professional at it, so she can take all the things that are meaningful to us and like things that we care about, and then like actually implement them and make them a reality. Like, figures like she pushed us to figure out our mantras, which we've got 4 mantras, and she like on a weekly basis.
What are your 4? Like, let's figure
out. They're here to serve, which is a reference or a nod to the hospitality industry as well. So here to serve. Numbers over hype, which is actually something. Here to serve was something we felt like we were already doing really, really well. Numbers over hype was something that we felt like we wanted to get better at. Mr. Yum's got a great culture. We have a lot of people that are very excitable, and sometimes that can translate into talking about things in adjectives rather than in numbers. So that's something that we've wanted to work on. The third is run towards the fire, which is,
I love that one.
Sounds a little bit morbid when you say it like that, but it's like something's going to be hard, something's definitely blowing up over there. Instead of running away from the problem, let's run towards the problem. And if we run towards the problem early, we're more likely to be able to solve for it or see a way out. So run towards the fire gets used a lot. And then the fourth one is think 10x. And all of those 4 mantras actually were not, they're not, it's not like that's how we wanted to run. That's like a lot of how we were already running our business. We just like wanted to crystallize what that meant. And Laura pushed us every 2 weeks. Every time we had a people catch up, she's like, how about those mantras? How about and Adrian and I would pull out the mantras, and then we'd delete them and add them and delete them and add them. And eventually we nailed those 4. And then what she did was she rolled them out really, really well. And she didn't just say like, this is what the mantras are. She found examples of like each of the times when someone had done something like that. She crystallized them, she communicated them, she like would reiterate them. Then she created what we call like the yummies, which is like an award. I think is it quarterly awards or monthly awards? Quarterly awards. And we pick a winner in each of the mantras. So one person for each, or maybe 2 people, doesn't matter how many people there are, but like for each of the mantras, so that we are consistently reminded of what they are. So yeah, she didn't even just like figure them out. She like had this whole plan for how she would roll it out to continue our trajectory. Yeah.
It's almost a truism in this business that having a great people and culture person early on, especially, and there's this sort of, VCs tend to have these rule of thumbs that we talk about, that we think apply to every business, which is complete bullshit. But the one rule of thumb that I think is actually pretty useful. We're just not very smart these days, so we tend to have to think in rules of thumbs. But the one I think that is an absolute truism is, by the time you're 30, 40 people, having a people and culture person just to cover that base and make sure that you are thinking about the processes and the values and things like that is incredibly important. And so if you're out there and you haven't got one and you're sort of approaching that size, get thinking about hiring a great P&C person.
Yeah, definitely. They become, you know, this filter between you and the team as well. If the team have a request of the founders, like one that comes up a lot from us is communication. Like how do they want to hear more from us? They want to hear about where we're going. They just like, teams love hearing the same thing over and over again. Like I'm like, most of the, I'm like, well, we've already talked about that. She was like, they just like, teams love hearing the same thing consistently all the time, like just same things, different ways, etc. Just consistently being reminded of goals and objectives and the motion to getting there. And she pushes us to do that more than what we would if we didn't have her. So
that runs the fire mantra. That is the one I love, and I think and Artie's in here in the chat. He's I think he summed it up well. The reason I like it so much, it shifts the mode to not away from a sort of a victim mode, blaming external forces, and creates a sense of agency within the company. Everybody has agency to go and fix things, and I think that's incredibly important to give culturally, to give everybody agency in your business.
100%.
What I know, you've also been just on the cultural thing. You've also been very focused around the mental health aspects and delivering for your team around support and networks and things like that. Can you touch a little bit around that, especially as we've gone through sort of lockdowns and some tough times?
Yeah, particularly Melbourne-based companies. It's been an extremely difficult 18 months. I think like at the core of it, you know, we can do all the things. Like, I think it's fine to say you've got mental health days, which anyone can take any number of days that they want at Mr. Young for Mental Health Day. We've got a program, it's called like Frankie's Health. I think it might be a startup as well, where you can log on and there's a whole bunch of therapists that you can chat to, and the company will pay for the usage of that product. Laura is like consistently talking about like things that we can do or conversations that we can have. But I think at the core of it, we've got very open and transparent and caring individuals, you know, people that want to tell you about how they're working through something. Like, it's not often victim mode. It's not like this I'm struggling and full stop, and I'm sorry, I'm struggling. Like, that is not often the conversation that happens at this young. It's like, I'm feeling a little bit shit, and this is maybe the reasons for it, and this is what I'm doing. This is who I'm chatting to. You know, this is the structure, or this is the help that I'm getting from either the team, family, friends, or you know, external support. I think like probably like normalizing it is like the first thing to do, just making it like, you know, a topic of conversation and trying to check in on how we're all feeling. And stress levels can get pretty high, right? Like, it's startups are super stressful, whether you've got anxiety or not. Like, it's anxiety inducing.
And now you're trying to manage that culture and that support across what, like 5-6 time zones, something crazy now. And I think this is one of the enduring parts of this story. I think is just how quickly you pushed and moved internationally. I remember, I can't remember. I see Stu from 1013 is on the line there. G'day, Stu. Give us a wave.
Hey.
There he is. I remember having a convo with Stu, because Stu led your seed round, your first seed round.
Yeah.
I remember having a I can't remember if it was before or after we had made the investment or the term sheet, but we talked about sort of your international expansion ambitions. And I call it ambitions, which is kind of a misnomer, because at the time you were already in LA. And I think that's the point that Stu made to me, is like, you know, you see a lot of founders in Australia, they talk about, you know, one day expanding internationally and their new target markets after Australia. And then there's other founders who, you know, you speak to on their way to the airport to fly to LA, and they're already there, and they're making things happen. And I think that high agency that, as you know, that is such a part of the culture generally, really came into play when you started thinking about your international expansion. What was that thought process like? How did you plan your initial trip to LA, and then talk us through what happens when you got there? You fly into LA and think, then what the hell am I going to do?
Yeah, it was Feb 2020, so sorry, 2021, early this year. Aussie companies, this is just the reality of being an Australian company. You can't really build a very big business staying as an Australian company with only local customers and local networks. We are a business, like, unlike Canva or, you know, Atlassian, it's a little bit difficult for a Mr. Yum to go internationally without people on the ground. It's not a business where you can, you know, build a software and then hope that it gets taken up in the US or the UK. If you've got one of those businesses, I think that's very, very cool, and potentially you don't have to do it exactly the way that we did. But we couldn't do that. Like, we needed to be on the ground, build teams on the ground, have a pretty local approach to growing Mr. Yum. At the time, Australia was like the darling of COVID. Like, everything had opened up. It was Feb 2021. We'd gone through this huge lockdown in Australia. Things were super open. Meanwhile, LA was the COVID hotspot of the world. Like, it was also, there were like bushfires and everything was blowing up, and politically it was also in a lot of trouble. We were choosing between the US and the UK for international expansion. We'd chosen the US, and we'd chosen LA for a whole bunch of different reasons. And because it was COVID, like, we had no option. We couldn't come back very quickly. We had to either go for 3 months or stay in Australia. We applied for our exemption. Luckily, it got like approved pretty quickly.
You didn't tell your mum you were flying over though, did you?
Yeah, I didn't actually. I think my mum might be on this call. So now I'm like, we didn't tell. Well, I didn't tell my parents that we were going because, they wouldn't have been very happy about the COVID situation in the US.
Flying into a COVID ravaged hotspot in LA.
Yeah, like, it was like 20,000 cases at the time. We were not vaccinated. You know, Australia was like no cases at the time. It seemed like the most insanely ridiculous thing to do. So Adrian and I booked like a one-way ticket to LA. We got on the plane. We were like one of 10 people on this flight to LA. And we looked at each other. We were like, man, what are we doing? Like, this is either the most, like, the best thing that we'll ever do, or like the most ridiculous thing that we'll ever do. We knew that once we got on the ground, we would have so much of a better sense for what the restaurants were thinking, how the like cafes were, like, just the operator mindset is so difficult to figure out from afar. Also, hiring and like getting to product market fit in a new region is impossible to do from afar. And we don't believe you can hire someone to do that for you without context of your business or a network into your company. So lucky we've got 4 founders. Like, we couldn't have done this without Kerry and Andre. Kerry and Andre stayed in Australia, continued to build the team there, and we got to LA. When we first got there, the first thing we did was like walk around, try to go to all restaurants, try and see if there were any ordering and payment products and any like similar products to Mr. Yum. We saw a lot of QR codes, but we didn't see many ordering and payment products at all. It's about a couple of years behind where we are in Australia. And then the UK was actually I'll be honest, it was like a total knee-jerk reaction. We saw that there were some interesting signs of adoption in the UK, and we started running digital ads. So we were like, let's just see what happens in London. Let's just see if we can get elements of traction without physically going to London. So we started running Facebook and Instagram ads, which is actually not how we like get customers today, but we thought we'll just give it a shot. And I remember 3 nights in a row in LA, because it's different time zones, Adrian and I would wake up to like 2 or 3 amazing inbound leads in the UK from all these ads that we were running. And immediately we were curious about what was going on in the UK, and it felt very hot at the time. Lucky we had someone on the ground that we were already chatting to and interviewing. He got started pretty quickly. And then this is probably the one other thing about international expansion. If you can't go to a region, send one of your very original team members to the region. So we couldn't go to London. We were already in LA. So we sent Justin, who was our first like non-developer hire. He started with us when we were a visual menu, when we hadn't even built out and ordering a payment product. He's super early, Mr. Yum. He flew to London. He did that for 3 months. He launched that market with Alex, our first hire, recruited the team, became our conduit in that market, and really acted like a founder and helped us launch London. So we launched LA and London within like 3 weeks of each other, like just the most two international markets at the same time. And very, very grateful that we did, because the UK is an absolutely awesome market for Mr. Yum.
It's great. It's excellent advice having people from the very beginning sort of go and see these new offices, because oftentimes we've found that getting the culture to transplant to a new office and getting the vision and the buy-in is hard unless you've got some of those early true believers. And you were lucky, and you had 2 founders based in Australia that could sort of look after the home front while you went off and did this, and then we're even stretched to the UK. It's a hell of a lot of work, but throwing yourself into it, I think, was key to it. What's can you when you are setting up shop in another country though, a lot of people are sort of thinking, what are the logistics? What I need to get? How does it work? Just tactically on the ground. How do I hire people in America? Do I have to give them like dental and whatever they call it, all that stuff?
Yeah.
How do you do all the practical parts of it?
Like really different, and really not anything like Australia. America is so different. So the first thing we did was we reached out to a whole bunch of people that we knew in Australia to try and connect us with people that had restaurant experience, tech experience in the US. We met a guy who was he's an SVP, so like a senior VP at Toast in their talent and recruitment function. Toast is an amazing point of sale company and restaurant tech company in the US. And he gave us all of these insights. He was like, this is what we did, this is how we recruited, etc., etc. And at the end he said, but you guys are probably going to mess it up. So I would recommend that you hire someone in talent, like very quickly. And so our first ever hire in the US, before we hired anyone else, was our head of talent. And I could not be more grateful that we did that, because she helped us. She was actually someone who worked in Michael's team at Toast. She was there for 5.5 years as one of their first 2 talent team members, and had hired hundreds of people for a restaurant tech company. She helped us navigate.
When we
were like, we don't know what to do. We were like, we don't know what to start. We don't know who to look for. We don't know compensation structures, commissions, bonuses, like all of this stuff, and benefits. So they call it benefits in the US, where the employer has to look after the medical, the dental, blah, 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 because the government doesn't do it. And if you don't have benefits in your package, you're not an attractive employer.
How are you creating this stuff? It's similar when Sam from McLeod Guru came on. He had the same advice. He hired as a COO, technically. It was his first US, because he didn't know how to work out just all the ins and outs of building an office out there, and he needed that help. It's kind of counterintuitive, because you think salesperson, marketing person, let's go, but actually taking a step back and helping you put the building blocks there is super useful.
Yeah, and fine. And like she, Jeannie had, when she started at Toast, her words were, nobody knew who we were and no one believed that they needed us. So like even though the company was so big when we recruited her, she had seen and believed in this very small company at the time, and being an entrepreneur. Like she was not, like, she's not an entrepreneur in her eyes, but she's absolutely an entrepreneur in our eyes, because she goes for the like not so clear, like she can see things that people can't see. So I mean, she's now a head of talent. She looks after the UK and the US. She's recruiting all over the world. She was just in London with us physically about a week ago. Those people are like, honestly, every day I'm like, I could not imagine doing this without Jeannie. So if you can find a great head of talent, it's like a
Get them
very
as soon as you
easy.
can.
Yeah, oh my God.
To find though, we've got
Oh
Andrew,
my God.
our head of talent, Andrew, is looking for about 6 of them in the portfolio at the moment. Everybody wants one, and they're not easy to find. So if you find one, grab them. Kim, I just want to take us back a little bit around the product as well, because I think we've had a few questions that have come through on the chat, and ultimately, certainly when we were getting to know you, the two things that shone through were the team and the product, which is exactly what you want in a seed bet. But there were lots of products. There are lots of products that are sort of solving similar problems. And so there was a question in the chat here, which I think is a good one, which is, why do you think you guys really broke out in this market when there were lots of people who were circling around this problem and realizing that there was a bit of a change in consumer behavior on foot?
Yeah, I had a really good think about this overnight, and people like, oh, talk to your customers and like say, oh, it's just like, that's just not, you can, but like I don't think that advice would be very unique or different. It's like, of course you have to listen to your customers, otherwise you'd probably not be successful in any stretch of the imagination. I think that the number one reason that we managed to build way faster than anyone else, like speed was our number one like the key factor that I think we wanted, like in the product race. It's like we had an idea. Two things: we had an idea as a team, and our team, like our engineers, were so entrepreneurial. Like Andre and Tom, if they thought the idea was good, they'd be like, "Let's do it. Let's do it. But how can we do it? What time frame do we need to do it in? Let's do it." Like typically, you hear the story of engineers being cautious and like pushing back on time frames and not so keen, and you have to scope it all out, and you have to build business cases around why you want to build product and blah blah blah. Like we didn't have that problem at all. Andre, our CTO and co-founder, is the most like crazy. He thinks like more 10x. He thinks 10x on me. Like he thinks like way longer term. We're doing like, I don't know, like building like 5 menus at a time or whatever, and he'd be like, how do we build 100 menus at a time or 1,000 menus at a time? Like just insane, crazy scale stuff that like you just don't even think you need to think about, but like he does. And I think finding incredibly entrepreneurial developers and engineers is how we got to where we got to. Because the culture was so, let's just try it. Like, let's just do that. Let's try it. Like, yeah, we're going to make some trade-offs. Let's talk about the trade-offs. Once we figured out the trade-offs that we're making from an engineering point of view, it's like speed versus, tech debt or whatever. Let's just make the decision and let's just do it. And then we know we can circle back to some of the debt. And if it does work, we'll repay the debt later. So like this, like we have a very, Tom and Andre and I, in the first like 50, like first like 30 people of Mr. Yum, the three of us just had like a very experimental and entrepreneurial like spirit about product. And I think that's really how we won. Yeah, just like having a team that just wants to do stuff that they believe in and not consistently trying to make something like a bigger project than it is, or over engineering something. Yeah, so just
That's it's something I've always been very impressed with you personally, Kim, is that sort of self-awareness to know what you're very good at personally, but also where you need to supplement it with great people around you, both in product and engineering and marketing and elsewhere. It takes a lot of, I think it takes a lot of humility as a CEO to sort of appreciate and then also bring those people on who are always going to be better at certain areas to sort of supplement you. As a CEO though, where do you see yourself focusing over the next few years? What bits are always going to be in your job versus hiring up people to do things in some ways better than you for other areas?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're going through a lot of restructuring at the moment, James, and as the company is growing, this is not is a question for me, but it's also a question for our first 10, 20 team members. Like, we're not going to be probably the best salesperson, the best marketing person, the best engineer, but like, where do we fit in this puzzle? If we're not going to be like the top dog at this exact thing that we're hired for, then like, what are we going to do? And try to triple down on the like areas of focus. I think my biggest strength is I say like seeing around corners. I have a good, like a very good instinct for what's coming, what to build, what the competitive landscape is going to look like, what movements are going to happen, and then trying to be there way before anyone else, and focusing the team around like what's around the corner and how we can be at the front of that pack, around the corner before anyone else. So I think that it's probably just spending a lot of time thinking about the evolution of our category and the evolution of the industry, and then trying to gather as many data points as possible to wrap up the path to getting there. That's in product, in partnerships, in regions, and like there's a lot of parts to that. So yeah, I think the parts that I'll try to hold on to, I don't know, like maybe I will, maybe I won't. If someone comes along that's better at it than me, then I think I'll happily move aside. I think I hold on to like product and the partnership lenses for quite some time. Yeah.
And being the keeper of the cultural flag, it's always such an important role for the CEO.
Yeah. Like 100%, but you know what, like I actually think that the four of us like share that cultural flag evenly. Like, I actually don't think that I hold that I think that Adrian and Kerry are actually way more natural and better at it than me, and they are like so empathetic, and they are like always thinking about how the team are feeling, and I actually think they're way better at that cultural stuff than I am, and I'm just keeping up with them.
That's very, very, very humble. But it's having worked with all four, you do share a huge amount of the load right across the board, and in particular, culture, and really feed off each other. You can see that. What's the how do you you talked a little bit about sort of helping your the team around the four of you, so your next your VP levels and right across the team sort of level up and make sure that they're able to keep up with the pace and the skill and the scale of the business. What are you doing to try and bring everybody up and sort of level everybody up across the board?
A lot of like, this has been our whole week for like the last 2 weeks, having conversations with every single team member who was one of our first 20 hires, and saying this is the extent of our growth in the next 6 months, and we need to have a think about where you want to fit in, and then we will build a team around the things that you want to do and fill the gaps of the areas that you don't like. Just trying to look after your early team members, because their roles will change and have to change. The things that we're doing are like, we definitely believe that sometimes people don't want to do management, but they're the best people for management, and just trying to encourage them to give it a crack and know that there's like a great support network around them that will help them with their leadership, like their perceived lack of management skills, even though there's no better in exchange for management skills than just being like great at what you do from a technical point of view, but then also a very good listener. So I think that's one. Second is we're doing a lot of moving people around. Like you were in sales, you don't want to do sales leadership. So what are you going to do? You're not going to be like an individual contributor in a sales team for the next 2 years of this year because you were one of our first 20 team members. So what do you want to do? Like if you don't want to do sales leadership, then you're going to get stuck in the sales hierarchy. And you're going to be an individual contributor in sales. If you want to do that, that's great. If you don't want to do that, if you want to do that, let's triple down on it. But if you don't want to do that, where else can we move you to in the company? And that could be into partnerships, you know, that could be into marketing, that could be into operations. So yeah, we're doing a lot of that at the moment. I think everyone feels like there's like a big, you know, we've cut the org chart like 8 times in the last 2 weeks.
We're keeping hold with people and finding them a role that they
finding 100%, like finding them a role that's big enough, that is exciting enough, that is growth opportunity enough, so that they stay, so that we don't take for granted the culture and our lack of churn when it comes to people. And we can already feel that Mr. Yum's becoming like hot property from a poaching point of view. Like I know that people are getting hit up way more by recruiters of other startups, etc. Because Mr. Yum is now on the hit list of companies to poach from. And I'm not like, you know, when we're grateful, but we're not taking our position around no one leaves Mr. Yum for granted. So we're consistently asking ourselves, like, where's this person going to be in 12 months? How can we make sure they're doing something different? There's lots of growth opportunity in front of them. That could be regions. So like that could be moving them to a different region. That's really good for 0 to 1 people, like people at the start of the journey. Like they're not great when it gets to 100 people. So you just take them out and move them to a different region, and they're like the best people. They're the best people for that role again. So yeah, it's a bit of a moving beast, but just making sure everyone's like genuinely excited about their role at Mr. Yum over the next 12 months is like our number 1 priority.
Well, the people, everyone I know and I've met in the team absolutely love it. And listen, we it's an absolute privilege for us to be a small part of the journey as well, and to be supporting you guys. I've had an incredible time getting to know the founding team and really learning from you, frankly, because there's a lot of lessons that we go and apply to a lot of our earlier stage companies, and in forums like this, where there's a fantastic amount of people here to learn from these lessons. So thank you, Kim. Thanks for taking the time, and thanks everybody for taking the time on a Thursday night to come here from Kim. And please get out there, go find a bar or a pub. Chances are that it's got Mr. Yum at it. Go and put some rounds on it and enjoy the product.
Thanks for coming, guys, and thanks for our team who are on here, and I think my parents were on here too. So thanks, Mum and Dad.
If I can see you, that's excellent. Thanks so much for everyone. We will have a recording of this for anyone that wants it, and we have a action-packed agenda of these sort of open source meetups, as you know. And so go and check out our website and our socials, and you'll see all the good stuff that's going on in Startup Oz, and as part of the Spark Festival as well. So there's plenty of really exciting stuff this month. So thanks again, everybody. Sorry we went a minute over, but appreciate you hanging out. See you again soon.
Bye.